General Voronin. General Voronin is the leader of duty during the events of Stalker Shadow of Chernobyl and Stalker 2. Being one of the duty founders and ideators, he is responsible for the faction's sacred code. He recruited almost all of duty key members. He came to power after General Krylov. After becoming the leader of duty, Voronin made a ceasefire pact with the Freedom faction, essentially an agreement to avoid open conflict. While some rogue elements of duty disobeyed these orders, he takes no actions against them. He most likely made the pact as duty didn't have the power to hold their territories and the barrier at the same time. That being the case, the two factions struck a deal to preserve themselves. He can be found at the duty base in the bar, but the Marked One won't be able to access the HQ until after he has been to the lab in X16 and talked to the barkeep. If the player tries to go to Voronin before visiting X16, duty members in the area will become hostile and fire inside. By the events of Stalker 2, Voronin still commands duty by obeying Ward's commands and signing the peace treaty with Freedom, which resulted from duty pulling out of Rostov and setting up a new base of operations at the cement factory, Tachenko. Tachenko is the legendary founding father of duty that once was one of the original military officers sent into the zone, alongside Krylov, on a mission to obliterate the center of it with nuclear weapons. However, once they arrived in the zone, oblivious to all of its dangers, they were hit by an emission. Tachenko was tired of his military life and had a desire to live in the zone. Because of these feelings, Tachenko arranged a communication breakdown to allow them to dissolve in the ranks of the loners. But neither he nor his close-knit circle were able to predict the level of pandemonium to break down chaos. In order to prevent the obliteration of himself, his friends and fellow comrades, he managed to unify the survivors into a faction that became known as Duty. In a karmic twist of fate, Tachenko and his inner circle vanished on a routine artifact hunting trip. The faction quickly formed a cover-up story, rumoring he traveled to Pripyat in search for artifacts, but most treated it with an aura of uncertainty, and rumors continued to circulate about his fate. Tachenko's team apparently fell into a space anomaly at the cooling tower in Yaniv. Effectively, locating this anomaly requires one to have the Swark detector, and upon approaching it with the detector active, the detector evidently causes enough interference to cause the anomaly to implode. After the implosion, the bodies of General Tachenko and his men fall out of the anomaly. When near the cooling tower, the player can hear General Tachenko's transmission. Tachenko says they've been without water for 2 days, and he requests assistance from duty. It is impossible to bring General Tachenko out of the anomaly alive. The player can jump down and loot the bodies, eventually finding Tachenko's body. Tachenko's body carries a PDA detailing his final moments. After realizing they were trapped, the second in command eventually went insane and shot and killed 2 of the others before killing himself. Last 2 survivors, Tachenko and his attendant named Chipurny, split up. Tachenko never saw the attendant again, and he believed that Chipurny may have escaped the anomaly. However, Chipurny's body can be found amongst the dead. Tachenko, on the other hand, uses his PDA to record his confession and his final moments. Krylov. General Krylov is a former member of the military and the leader of duty in STALKER. General Krylov was originally a member of government military strike force under the command of Captain Tachenko, sent to the very center of the zone when it first appeared. They were tasked to blow up the center with nuclear explosives. However, during the time they did not know what to expect in the newly formed zone. They had no protection against anomalies, no detectors, and no information on what to expect. In short, they were dropped into the zone blind, and to make things worse, they encountered an emission as soon as they arrived into the zone, and most of the survivors died from anomaly. Krylov developed a deep resentment for the military because they were sent straight to their death. He does, however, have connections in the Spetsnaz. Despite his previous experiences and military nature, he is quite a nice and decent person. While he believes that the government left the survivors to die, the true reason for their abandonment was different. He is the leader of the duty faction. By the events of Clear Sky, he was first met by S.T.A.L.K.E.R when he needed access to the Agroprom underground in order to find Sterl's stash. Krylov agrees on the condition that S.T.A.L.K.E.R floods the underground in the hopes to kill the mutants that reside there. When the job is completed, he will give 10,000 rubles to the player when he talks to him again. Once the player has completed the job, the player can also ask Krylov to join duty. School. School Group is a rogue sub-faction of duty that split from Voronin. S.T.A.L.K.E.R is a duty colonel who commands a special military operation established in the army warehouses. He and his men actively disobeyed Voronin's orders not to attack Freedom directly. The group is planning to storm the Freedom base, but all their attempts so far have been thwarted by Freedom snipers, who are guarding the western wall that S.T.A.L.K.E.R and his group plan to blow up and enter the base. Skull's group resides in the abandoned farmstead to the west of the Freedom Base, leading a group of 7 Thunder S-14 equipped, exoskeleton-wearing experts. Skull can hire Marked One to assist the group assault on the Freedom Base, saying that he requires a job for a good shooter and that the Marked One should piss off if they don't want to participate. He will require first to kill the sniper that is responsible for shooting one of Skull's men, and then to participate on the assault on the Freedom Base. Skull may die during the battle, but even though the mission will fail, you can still go through, as Skull's second in command will still reward you. This assault will end when everyone in the Freedom Base is dead. Alternatively, one can tip Lukash about Skull's plans, which will prompt him to send Max and his team to eliminate Skull's group. In earlier versions of the plot, it was Wolf that gave Skull the dynamite. In the final versions of the game, Fnatic does mention that Wolf left the rookie village with a box of dynamite, but Skull never brings up the origin of the explosives he uses. Shulga. Lieutenant Colonel Shulga is the leader of duty branch in Yaniv during the events of STALKER Call of Pripyat, and like most, if not all, of duty's high command, Shulga once served in the Ukrainian military as a field officer, stationed near what was to become the zone. When the zone formed, he and Lenya, an intelligence officer and his friend, were sent to the zone as part of the investigation effort. During their work, some kind of incident occurred, leaving both badly wounded. They were both picked up by dutiers and taken under their care and protection. Unfortunately, Lenya's injuries were too severe and he died. Traumatized by this experience, and with no one else to turn up to, Shulga decided to join duty. After all, he had his own score to settle with the zone. Shulga can be found in his office in the southern part of Yanov, and he has 2 possible endings depending on the player's stance in the Duty Freedom faction war. If the achievement, A Friend of Freedom, has been obtained, Loki and his men convince the loners to assist them in pushing Duty out of the Yanov station. Lieutenant Colonel Shulga is killed in action during the last fighting around the Yanov station, and Duty retreats. If the achievement, A Friend of Duty, has been obtained, Shulga convinces the loners to get rid of Freedom. If the player doesn't achieve neither A Friend of Duty or A Friend of Freedom, a fragile peace between the squads is established at Yaniv. The fighters in both factions get tired of the constant struggle and leave, opting the loners to join the station instead. Shulga, albeit cut from the final release in Heart of Chernobyl, was promoted to general, and although not appearing in the game, him and Loki surviving means that the neutral ending of STALKER Call of Pripyat is canon. Zulu. Zulu is a former member of Duty who appears both in STALKER Call of Pripyat and STALKER 2. Zulu was part of the Duty detachment led by Shulga, sent to gain a foothold in the center of the zone. Upon arrival at Yaniv, they were engaged in a fierce firefight with Loki and his men. During the ordeal, Zulu alerted both sides of an impending mission, forcing the factions to cease fire and shelter together with Yaniv. Zulu was later involved in negotiations to have Yaniv station be neutral territory to be shared by both Duty and Freedom. However, following another skirmish between the factions, he resigned from duty and settled at a nearby tower as a free stalker. In the events of STALKER 2, Zulu splits from Voronin since he thinks he destroyed duty by obeying Ward's commands and agreements, and founds his own group called Zulu Group, where his main mission so far has been recruiting new soldiers through a special test system he created where they need to prove themselves killing a mutant nest before joining. Also, Zulu faction is working on killing small banding gangs across the region to establish some control and power before regrouping and going deeper into the zone in the search of a way to kill all of the mutants.